The twin pontoons of the de Havilland Beaver skimmed the glass-smooth surface of Lake Kintla, kicking up a rooster tail of spray that glittered like shattered diamonds in the afternoon Sunday. Dr. Eris Thorne, more comfortable now in a worn leather flight jacket than a sterile scrub top, nudged the throttle. The floatplane roared, lifting cleanly into the vast blue canvas of the Montana sky. Below, the ancient, jagged teeth of the Rocky Mountains stretched to the horizon, a wilderness so immense it swallowed human ambition whole. This was her sanctuary, a place she'd fled to, a place that demanded respect, or it would break you. She was just past the western edge of the Bob Marshall Wilderness, running a routine supply drop for a remote hunting lodge, when the sky above her split, not with thunder, but with an impossible, concussive crack that vibrated through the very airframe of her Beaver. A sonic boom. It was too close, too powerful for the usual military exercises that occasionally rumbled through the distant high-altitude corridors. Before the echoes had even begun to fully dissipate, a second sound, far more horrifying, tore through the silence of the mountains, the banshee shriek of tortured metal, a sound that spoke of catastrophic failure. Eris, a woman whose senses had been honed to razor-sharp precision in the organized chaos of an urban emergency room, instantly swiveled her head. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, scanned the horizon. There! A fleeting, blinding glint of silver, then a plume of thick, oily black smoke mushrooming against the crisp blue sky, far to the northeast of her designated flight path. It was a fighter jet, and it was going down. Hard. Her heart, usually a steady professional drum, hammered against her ribs. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't some distant, abstract incident. This was real, raw, and unfolding before her eyes. Without conscious thought, her hand reached for the radio. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Sierra Papa 1-7 calling anyone on guard. I have a visual on a downed aircraft, military designation, approximately 30 miles northeast of Granite Peak. Multiple impact signatures, black smoke plume visible. Bearing approximately 340 from my current position, requesting immediate assistance and relay to appropriate agencies. Her voice, usually calm and measured, held an urgent edge that cut through the crackle of static. A moment of static, then a laconic, disembodied voice from the regional FAA tower in Missoula crackled back. Sierra Papa 1-7, this is Missoula Control. We show you off route. Confirm your position and observations. Confirmed, Missoula, Eris replied, her gaze still fixed on the distant, diminishing smoke. I witnessed the crash. Not an explosion, more like a structural failure followed by impact. The pilot likely ejected, but no parachute visual. Recommend immediate SAR dispatch. Coordinates are approximate 48 degrees, 05 minutes north, 3 degrees, 22 minutes west. Repeat, immediate SAR. Another pregnant pause. Sierra Papa 1-7, we've received an alert from NORAD. This is a military incident. Remain clear of the area. Federal agencies will be handling this. Do not approach the crash site. Eris clenched her jaw, a familiar surge of frustration bubbling within her. Missoula, I understand it's military, but I have a visual, and I'm the closest asset. There's a pilot out there, potentially injured. Every minute counts. Before Missoula could respond, another voice, gravelly and imbued with a thick, rural drawl, cut in on the local emergency channel, overriding the FAA frequency. This is Sheriff Brody, Flathead County. Who's this Sierra Papa 1-7? Identify yourself. Eris sighed, a weary breath escaping her lips. This is Eris Thorne, Sheriff. I just reported a downed military jet. Thorne, right. Heard you. About time you reported something useful instead of just buzzing around. Brody's voice was dismissive, almost contemptuous. You just stay clear, darlin'. This here's a professional operation now. My deputies are already mobilizing. The rage bait began. Eris knew this terrain like the back of her hand. She could navigate it blind. She had a first-hand account, precise coordinates, and the professional acumen to understand the urgency. Brody, a man whose reputation preceded him, a man who ran his small county with a heavy hand and a heavier dose of mistrust for outsiders, especially women, was already dismissing her. Sheriff, Eris began, trying to keep her tone level. My coordinates are precise. That's pretty specific for a glimpse, ma'am. The terrain up there is unforgiving. You'll need more than a few deputies with ATVs. I'm suggesting a fixed-wing aerial search immediately before the weather moves in. Heard you the first time, Thorne, Brody retorted, his voice hardening. And I don't need some charter pilot telling me how to run a search and rescue. You're a civilian. Stay out of it. We've got our own system, and we don't need no hotshot getting in the way of federal matters. Understand? Stay on your flight plan, or I'll have the FAA ground you. The threat hung in the air, a blunt instrument wielded by a man whose authority was his entire identity. Eris's grip tightened on the control yoke, her knuckles white. She looked out at the distant, fading wisp of smoke, a silent testament to a life potentially hanging by a thread. Brody's incompetence wasn't just irritating, it was deadly. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she was the only one who truly understood the clock was ticking. The silence of the mountains was about to swallow more than just an aircraft. The scent of aviation fuel and stale coffee hung in the air of Eris's small, corrugated metal hangar, a stark contrast to the antiseptic tang of a hospital that still occasionally haunted her dreams. Her beaver was tied down, its pontoon still dripping lake water onto the worn concrete floor. She stared at the map tacked to the wall, a detailed topographical rendering of the Flathead National Forest, her finger tracing the path she'd observed, then pinpointing the likely crash site. The coordinates she'd given Missoula and Brody were as accurate as humanly possible from an aerial observation, a testament to her innate sense of direction and her years spent navigating this unforgiving landscape. Her mind, however, was not entirely on the map. A ghost from her past flickered in the periphery, a stark, unwelcome memory. The frantic beeping of monitors, the urgent shouts of nurses, the rhythmic, desperate compressions beneath her hands. Charge to 200? Clear? The memory was visceral, almost overwhelming. She saw the face of the young man, a victim of a hit and run, his eyes wide and unseeing, even as she sliced open his chest, searching for the failing heart. Blood, so much blood. It was Chicago, 5 years ago, the final, brutal crescendo of a career that had consumed her. She had been Dr. Eris Thorne, a rising star in trauma surgery at Cook County General, working 80-hour weeks, making life-or-death decisions in the blink of an eye. She was good, exceptionally good. People called her the Ice Queen, not because she was cold, but because in the face of chaos, her mind remained an oasis of calm, surgically precise. But even ice queens could melt. The relentless parade of trauma, the impossible choices, the inevitable losses that burrowed into her soul, it had all accumulated. The last straw had been a child, no older than 5, caught in gang crossfire. Eris had worked for hours, a desperate, valiant fight, only to watch the last flicker of life leave those innocent eyes. That night, she'd walked out of the ER, handed in her resignation, and never looked back. The city, the demands, the constant proximity to death, it had become too much. She had sought refuge in the opposite extreme, the vast, silent, and indifferent wilderness of Montana. Here, her life and death decisions were usually limited to judging wind currents or predicting sudden microbursts over the mountains. She ran a small seaplane charter, flying tourists, hunters, and supplies to remote cabins. The skills she'd honed, quick assessment, decisive action, and almost obsessive attention to detail, found a new, if less dramatic, application in aviation. But the core of who she was, the highly trained physician, remained. Her small office, crammed into a corner of the hangar, was a testament to her dual life. Aviation charts lay beside dusty medical textbooks, surgical emergencies, advanced trauma life support, wilderness medicine, a pristine, military-grade field surgical kit, purchased years ago on a whim, sat in a locked cabinet. It contained far more than basic first aid: suture kits, sterile scalpels, IV fluids, broad-spectrum antibiotics, even a compact intubation set. It was the kind of kit a doctor would take into a war zone, not on a routine flight. Eris pulled out her old, battered scanner and tuned it to the local emergency frequencies. Brody's voice, self-important and blustery, filled the hangar. Units, continue ground search along the south fork of the Flathead. Keep an eye out for anything, any debris. Air Force says they're sending up their own birds, but they're still an hour out. Let's show them we can handle this. Eris scoffed. Brody's South Fork search was miles from her confirmed crash site. He was searching in the wrong valley, possibly swayed by a garbled initial report from a hiker who'd heard the boom but not seen the impact. His ego wouldn't allow him to consider that a civilian, particularly a woman, might have more accurate information. She heard the frustrated crackle of a deputy trying to explain that the South Fork was dense forest and that visibility was zero. Brody cut him off. Just follow orders, Jenkins. I got this handled. Eris pressed her lips into a thin line. Handled. That poor pilot, if he was still alive, was out there in increasingly frigid temperatures, potentially bleeding out, while an incompetent sheriff grandstanded miles away. The military's own birds were still an hour out, and by then, the golden hour, then the platinum 10 minutes, critical for trauma survival, would have long passed. The old instinct, the one that had driven her through medical school and into the grinding shifts of the ER, began to stir. It was a powerful, almost uncontrollable urge to act, to intervene, to save a life. Brody's dismissal had not extinguished that fire. It had fanned it into a simmering rage. She walked over to the weather map. A cold front, an early winter storm system, was moving rapidly down from Canada, threatening to blanket the entire region in heavy snow and freezing rain within hours. The forecast predicted whiteout conditions and grounded flights. If that pilot was still alive, he didn't have hours, he barely had minutes. And if Brody and his deputies were looking in the wrong place, then no one was coming for him. The ghost of the ER stirred, stronger now, urging her to action. She might have left the profession, but the oath, the deep-seated impulse to save, remained etched into her very being. Hours bled into a frustrating eternity. The sun dipped below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, a beautiful but deceptive backdrop to the unfolding crisis. Eris remained glued to her scanner, a silent, seething witness to Sheriff Brody's ineptitude. His search efforts were, as predicted, a chaotic mess. Deputies on ATVs were getting bogged down in the dense undergrowth of the wrong valley, their radios crackling with complaints about impenetrable terrain and failing GPS signals. Helicopters, finally dispatched by the Air Force, were still struggling with the vastness of the wilderness, their pilots communicating their frustration over Brody's fragmented, often contradictory, instructions. Sheriff, this is Air Force 19er. We're getting conflicting reports on terrain elevation. Your ground units are reporting low-level forest, but our instruments indicate extreme high-altitude peaks in the vicinity of your stated grid. The voice of the Air Force pilot was strained, professional, but clearly exasperated. Brody, of course, doubled down. Just stick to the grid, 19er. My men are on the ground. They know this area. We're working a perimeter. Perimeter. Eris almost laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. A perimeter around nothing. Her finger, still on the map, jabbed at the cluster of peaks she'd identified, miles away from Brody's misguided search. The pilot was up there, in the bitter cold, exposed and alone. At one point, Eris heard Brody on the radio with what sounded like an Air Force liaison officer, a Major Thompson, who had finally arrived at the makeshift command center in the county sheriff's office. Sheriff, our intel suggests a high-altitude ejection? Thompson's voice was sharp, concise, lacking any of Brody's rural languor. The pilot, Captain Vance, is equipped with a survival kit, but given the crash parameters, impact trauma is highly probable. We need to focus on a rapid, surgical search of the most likely impact zone, not just a broad sweep. Major, with all due respect, I've been running search and rescue in this county for 20 years, Brody drawled, bristling at the implied criticism. We know how to find folks out here. Just gotta be patient. This ain't no city park. And we've had a local report, a civilian, who claims she saw something in a different area, but she's known for being a bit of a busybody, disregarded her. We're sticking to the primary grid. Eris's hands clenched into fists. Busybody. Disregarded. The raw, dismissive contempt was a physical blow. She was not a busybody. She was a trained observer, a professional pilot, and a highly skilled medical practitioner. But to Brody, she was just Thorn, a woman, an outsider, a threat to his carefully constructed little kingdom. The frustration became unbearable. She couldn't just sit there. She fired up the beaver, her heart pounding with a mixture of righteous fury and cold, calculated determination. She filed a flight plan with Missoula Control for a routine aerial survey of a logging operation, a good 50 miles south of the crash zone, hoping to avoid drawing Brody's ire. But her true course would take her directly over the periphery of the peaks she'd identified. She wasn't going to interfere with Brody's operation. She was going to find the pilot before Brody's operation could fail him completely. The air grew colder as she ascended. Clouds, thick and bruised purple, were already beginning to gather on the western horizon, heralding the arrival of the storm. She flew a grid pattern, low and slow, her eyes sweeping the ground, searching for any anomaly, any sign. And then she saw it, a glint. Not the large wreckage field she'd expected, but something small, metallic, partially obscured by snow-dusted pines on a high ridge. She circled, descending cautiously, her heart thumping. It was the detached canopy of an F-16, crumpled and torn, miles from the primary grid. Brody's team was fruitlessly combing. If the canopy was here, the pilot couldn't be far. This was it. This was confirmation. She immediately radioed Missoula Control, her voice urgent. Missoula, this is Sierra Papa 1-7. I have found debris, significant debris, an F-16 canopy. Approximate coordinates 48 degrees, 07 minutes north, 3 degrees, 25 minutes west. Repeat, I have the canopy. This is a primary impact indicator. The pilot is likely in this vicinity. Before Missoula could respond, Brody's voice, now laced with outright fury, exploded over the local frequency. Thorne, what the hell are you doing up there? I told you to stay clear. You are contaminating a federal investigation site. This is an active military crash, not your damn playground. Eris clenched her jaw, her fury matching his. Sheriff, I found the canopy. It's miles from where your men are searching. This confirms my initial report. I don't care what you found, Brody bellowed, his voice distorted by static and rage. You're interfering with a federal operation? That's a felony, Thorne. I'm calling the FAA right now. I'm having your license revoked. Get your damn plane out of the air and get back to your hangar, or I'll have you arrested when you land. The threat was chilling, a stark reminder of his willingness to abuse his power. But beneath the threat, Eris heard the desperate, terrified note of a man losing control, his carefully constructed authority crumbling. Sheriff, Eris said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. There's a pilot out there, and you're wasting time. I'm going to find him. She cut the transmission, refusing to give him the satisfaction of another retort. Her compass was now locked on the canopy site. She circled once more, memorizing landmarks, plotting a mental course. The storm clouds were rolling in fast now, swallowing the peaks. A few stray snowflakes, sharp and cold, peppered her windscreen. Back at her hangar, the first real snow began to fall, swirling in thick, wet flakes. The wind howled, rattling the metal sheets of the building. The scanner, still on, carried the grim update. Due to rapidly deteriorating weather conditions, all aerial search operations are being suspended for the night. Ground teams are being pulled back to base camp. Repeat, all search operations suspended until morning, pending weather assessment. It was Major Thompson's voice now, weary and grim. Chances of survival after 24 hours in these conditions are remote. We will reassess at first light. God help him. God help him. Eris stood in the dim light of her hangar, the words echoing in the silence. The storm outside was a deafening roar. They were calling off the search. They were giving up. Brody had won. His incompetence, his ego, his petty vendetta against her, it had all converged into a death sentence for a downed pilot. A cold, hard resolve settled in Eris's gut. She might have left the ER, but she had never abandoned her oath. She looked at the field's surgical kit, then at the sturdy frame of her beaver. Her plane could land on any decent patch of water, even a remote mountain lake. She might not be able to fly to the crash site in this weather, but she could get close. She began moving with a surgeon's efficiency, her movements precise and unhesitating. Fuel tanks topped off. Survival gear, a heavy-duty tent, sub-zero sleeping bag, emergency rations, a satellite phone stowed securely. The field surgical kit, now the most vital piece of equipment, was meticulously packed into a waterproof duffel bag. A sturdy axe, a coil of climbing rope, a high-powered flashlight. She was going in, alone, against the storm, against the wilderness, against Brody's threats, and against the grim pronouncement of the Air Force. A pilot was out there, and Eris Thorne, the forgotten surgeon, the dismissed pilot, was going to find him or die trying. The rage bait had finally worked its magic, not just on the reader, but on Eris herself, igniting a fire that would not be quenched. The beaver lifted off Lake Kintla as the first fingers of twilight clawed at the mountains. The visibility was already plummeting, snowflakes like tiny, furious fists hammering against the windscreen. Eris flew by instinct, by the intimate knowledge of the terrain etched into her brain, and by the faint, shimmering glow of her instrument panel. She stayed low, hugging the contours of the valleys, using the natural windbreaks of the towering peaks to fight the turbulence. It was a flight on the razor's edge of impossibility, a dance with death. But for Eris, The fear was a cold, distant thing, overshadowed by the burning urgency of her mission. She found a small, unnamed mountain lake, barely large enough for her pontoons, nestled between two snow-covered ridges. The landing was brutal, the plane shuddering as it bit into the choppy, freezing water. She secured the plane as best she could, then began the brutal ascent. The snow was already knee-deep, the wind whipping it into blinding squalls. Her compass and GPS became her only guides in the whiteout. Every step was a battle, a lung-burning, muscle-aching struggle. The weight of her pack, laden with medical supplies and survival gear, dug into her shoulders. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only 3 hours, she crested a ridge. Below, barely visible through the swirling snow, was the dark, crumpled silhouette of the F-16. It was wedged into a snowdrift, its tail section sheared clean off, the cockpit a mangled mess. Bile rose in Eris's throat. Survival looked impossible. She plunged down the treacherous slope, half sliding, half running. The wreckage was a scene of utter devastation. Metal shrapnel was scattered like deadly confetti. But then, a flash of orange. The pilot's survival suit. He lay sprawled precariously close to the main impact crater, partially buried in snow, a grim, still form. "Hello?" Eris yelled, her voice hoarse from the cold and exertion. "Can you hear me?" No response. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her professional calm. She scrambled forward, her heart hammering. He was unconscious, his face ashen, a trickle of blood drying on his temple. His left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, a compound fracture clearly visible beneath the torn fabric of his flight suit, bone protruding through skin. There were signs of internal bleeding, too. A distended abdomen, shallow, rapid breathing. His body temperature was dangerously low. Hypothermia. He was alive, but barely. This was it. The ghost of the ER was not a ghost anymore. It was a living, breathing imperative. Eris the pilot vanished. Dr. Eris Thorne took over. "Okay, Captain," she murmured, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Let's get you back to the living." Her first priority was to get him out of the snow and into some kind of shelter. She rummaged through her pack, pulling out her ultra-light sub-zero tent. It took her nearly an hour, her fingers numb with cold, to wrestle it open and anchor it in the brutal wind. With immense effort, she dragged the pilot inside, laying him on the insulated ground cloth. She stripped away his outer layers, careful to avoid further injury, and wrapped him in her own sleeping bag, then covered him with an emergency thermal blanket. Her medical kit was next. She assessed his injuries. The compound fracture was severe. He also showed signs of a pneumothorax, a collapsed lung, likely from the impact. His breathing was becoming increasingly labored, a gurgling sound in his chest. Pressure was building in his chest cavity, threatening to crush his remaining lung and heart. She didn't have time to wait for help. She pulled out a sterile scalpel, an iodine swab, and a small, rigid plastic tube from the kit. The decision was instantaneous, grim, and utterly necessary. A field thoracostomy. She had done it countless times in the ER, but never in a flimsy tent, in a blizzard, with a rapidly dying patient. "This is going to hurt, Captain," she whispered, as if he could hear her. "But it's going to save you." She located the correct intercostal space, sterilized the skin, and with a deep breath, made the incision. The pilot's body twitched, a faint moan escaping his lips. She carefully inserted the tube, and with a satisfying hiss, air rushed out, relieving the pressure. His breathing, though still shallow, became less strained. A small victory. Next, the compound fracture. She couldn't set it perfectly here, but she could stabilize it. She found pieces of lightweight composite from the jet's wreckage, surprisingly strong, and used them with medical tape and gauze to fashion a makeshift splint. It was crude, but effective, immobilizing the limb. The next 48 hours were a blur of desperate, grueling care. Eris checked his vitals constantly, administering IV fluids for dehydration and shock, giving him broad-spectrum antibiotics to ward off infection, and pain medication from his own survival kit, which she'd finally located. She rationed her own food and water, focusing entirely on him. She talked to him, even when he was unconscious, giving him updates, telling him she wouldn't leave. The storm raged outside, burying the tent in feet of snow, an impenetrable white wall that cut them off from the world. Her satellite phone, when she finally managed to get a weak, intermittent signal, became her only link. "This is Eris Thorne, Sierra Papa 17. I have located Captain Leo Vance, call sign Comet. He is alive. Compound fracture, probable pneumothorax. I've performed a field thoracostomy and splinted his leg. Severe hypothermia, but his vitals are stabilizing. He needs immediate extraction. Coordinates are 48 degrees, 07 minutes north, 3 degrees, 25 minutes west. Repeat. I have the pilot, he is alive, I am a doctor. A long, crackling silence. Then, the infuriating, familiar drawl of Sheriff Brody. Thorne, I told you to stay out of it. This is a federal crime. You are interfering with a military operation. You're gonna do time for this, lady. His voice was apoplectic, distorted by the poor connection, but his rage was palpable. Sheriff, Eris retorted, her own voice weary but unwavering. Your military operation called off the search. This man would be dead if I hadn't come. He is alive because of me. Now stop grandstanding and get him help. Help? You think you're helping? You're making things worse. You're some rogue civilian playing doctor, Brody fumed. He then began talking to someone else in the background, likely Major Thompson, whose frustrated voice could be heard. I'm telling you, Major, she's a flight risk, probably delusional. She thinks she's a doctor. She gave me a hard time for years. Then, another voice, oily and condescending, came over the line. It was Dr. Evans, the local county physician, a man Eris had briefly interacted with years ago and found to be arrogant and dismissive of any medical opinion not his own. This is Dr. Evans, Miss Thorne, he began, his tone dripping with professional disdain. Sheriff Brody has informed me of your unconventional actions. As a medical professional, I must strongly advise you against attempting any further procedures. You are not licensed to practice in this state, and any treatment you administer could lead to severe legal ramifications. Without proper diagnostic equipment, your assessment is anecdotal at best. You should extract yourself immediately and allow trained professionals to handle the situation. Eris stared at the satellite phone, tears of sheer frustration welling in her eyes, quickly freezing on her cheeks. These men, sitting in their warm, safe offices, were actively trying to stop her, to undermine her, to threaten her, while she literally held a dying man's life in her hands, fighting a raging blizzard and severe injuries. The sheer, infuriating injustice of it all fueled her. Dr. Evans, Eris spat, her voice cold steel. I'm looking at a living, breathing human being who wouldn't be here if I'd listened to you or your incompetent sheriff. His vitals are stable, his chest is clear, and his leg is splinted. You want to argue medical ethics from your armchair? Come here, come out into this storm, find us, and then you can lecture me. Until then, you can both go to hell. I'm a doctor, and I'm saving this man's life. She cut the connection again, the battery on the satellite phone critically low. She turned her attention back to Captain Vance, who was stirring fitfully, a low groan escaping his lips. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, pain-filled. Water, he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Eris held a cup of melted snow to his lips. Take it slow, Captain. You're going to be okay. I've got you. He looked at her, his eyes trying to focus. Who? Dr. Thorne, she replied, a faint, weary smile touching her lips. And you, Captain Vance, are a very lucky man. Now rest. We've still got a long way to go. The storm raged for another 12 hours, and Eris continued her vigil, feeding him, monitoring him, keeping him warm, fighting off her own exhaustion and the biting cold. For 48 hours, she was his sole guardian, his last, desperate hope. The entire world, it seemed, had conspired to leave them to die, but Eris Thorne, the woman they had dismissed, was not about to let that happen. The storm finally broke, not with a sudden calm, but with a gradual, grudging retreat. The sun, a pale, anemic disk, struggled to burn through the residual cloud cover, casting an ethereal glow over the snow-laden peaks. Inside the tiny tent, Eris was at the end of her rope. Her body ached in places she didn't know existed, her eyes were gritty with fatigue, and her voice was a raw whisper. But Captain Vance, though weak and in pain, was undeniably better. He was conscious, able to hold a conversation, albeit a very soft one, and his color had improved. She tried her satellite phone again. This time, the signal was stronger, and the voice on the other end was different. This is Major Thompson, Air Force. Is this Eris Thorne? The voice was crisp, military, and held a hint of urgency, but no longer the dismissive tone she'd heard from Brody. Yes, Major. This is Eris Thorne. I'm with Captain Vance. He's stable, but he needs immediate medical evacuation. We understand, Miss Thorne. We've been tracking your intermittent signals. Your last report was impressive, if unorthodox. We're dispatching a pararescue team. They're about 10 minutes out. Can you mark your position? Relief, so profound it almost buckled her knees, washed over Eris. Yes, Major. I have a flare gun. I'll pop a smoke flare as soon as I hear them. Good. Hold tight, Miss Thorne. Help is coming. 10 minutes later, the distant thrum of rotor blades grew into a deafening roar. A sleek, black Air Force Pave Hawk helicopter materialized out of the mountain mists, a powerful, graceful beast against the backdrop of snow and rock. It hovered directly overhead, kicking up a furious maelstrom of snow. A hoist lowered from the belly of the helicopter. Two figures, clad in olive drab, rappelled down, their movements swift and practiced. They were pararescue jumpers, PJs, the Air Force's elite combat medics, trained for the most extreme rescue operations. They landed silently in the snow, their weapons slung across their chests, their faces grim and focused. The lead PJ, a burly man with kind but intensely serious eyes, took in the small tent, the makeshift splint, the IV bag hanging from a tree branch, and Captain Vance, pale but lucid. He looked at Eris, who stood by the tent flap, looking like a snow-covered scarecrow, exhausted but defiant. He expected a panicked civilian, perhaps even a hypothermic one. He saw a woman whose competence radiated from her like heat. "Ma'am," the PJ said, his voice deep and calm, "I'm Master Sergeant Reyes. We're here for Captain Vance, Air Force Pararescue." "Dr. Eris Thorne," she replied, managing a weak nod. "He's stable. Compound fracture, left tibia. Resolved pneumothorax. Hypothermia is managed. He needs a full workup for internal injuries." Reyes's eyes widened almost imperceptibly as he processed her concise, medical-grade assessment. He moved quickly to Vance, his trained hands efficiently assessing the pilot's condition. He examined Eris's splint, the site of the thoracostomy, the IV drip. His gaze flicked back to Eris, a look of profound respect dawning in his eyes. You did all this?" he asked, a note of incredulity in his voice. "I did," Eris confirmed, her voice raspy. "He was dying. There was no time to wait." Reyes knelt beside Vance, pulling out his own advanced medical gear. He ran a quick professional assessment, confirming Eris's findings. Then, he looked up at her again. "Ma'am," he said, his voice filled with awe, "you just saved his life. Who the hell are you?" Eris simply offered a weary shrug. "A doctor who got tired of the city." The second PJ, equally professional, began preparing Vance for extraction, securing him onto a litter. Just as they were about to hoist him, the sound of an approaching vehicle, tires crunching on the snow-packed road that led to the closest trailhead, broke the tense silence. Sheriff Brody. He stomped out of his truck, his face contorted with rage, Major Thompson following behind him, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Brody, clearly having heard the helicopter and seen the smoke flare, had rushed here, undoubtedly to make his arrest, to reassert his authority in front of the military. "Thorne!" Brody bellowed, his voice echoing in the pristine mountain air. "You're under arrest for interfering with a federal investigation, reckless endangerment, and practicing medicine without a license." He started to stride towards her, his hand already on his sidearm. Master Sergeant Reyes stepped forward, blocking Brody's path, his imposing frame radiating quiet authority. The Air Force PJ, a man who faced combat situations regularly, radiated an aura that immediately dwarfed the small-town sheriff. "Sheriff," Reyes said, his voice calm but with an unmistakable edge of steel, "this is an active U.S. Air Force recovery operation. This area is now under federal jurisdiction." "I don't care what it is," Brody spat, his face purple with fury. "That woman is a criminal. She put that pilot at risk." Reyes turned slowly, his eyes, previously kind, now chillingly cold. He gestured towards Captain Vance, who was now secured on the litter, being prepared for hoist. "Sheriff, Captain Vance is alive because Dr. Thorne found him, stabilized him, and kept him alive for over 48 hours in a blizzard. Your investigation was miles off course. Your search and rescue was called off. If not for her, this man would be dead." Major Thompson, stepping forward, added, "Sheriff, we monitored the communications. Dr. Thorne's medical assessment and treatment were textbook, under impossible conditions. We owe her Captain Vance's life." Brody spluttered, caught utterly flat-footed. His grandstanding, his threats, his petty vindictiveness, it had all culminated in this moment of public, undeniable humiliation. The PJs, the Air Force officer, the very pilot he had tried to abandon, They were all standing there, implicitly and explicitly, against him. Now, Reyes concluded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, I suggest you return to your vehicle, Sheriff. Your presence is no longer required on this federal site. And if I hear another word about arresting Dr. Thorne, I assure you it will become a matter of formal military intervention. Brody, utterly deflated, his face slack with shock and impotent rage, could only stare. He was a small-town bully facing down a force far beyond his comprehension. He turned, his shoulders slumped, and stomped back to his truck, defeated. As the winch whirred, lifting Captain Vance and the PJs into the belly of the helicopter, Eris felt a wave of profound exhaustion, but also a quiet sense of triumph. She had faced down incompetence, malice, and the raw power of the wilderness, and she had won. As the helicopter lifted off, leaving her alone in the silent, snow-covered mountains, she knew her job was done. A week later, life at Eris's small hangar had returned to its usual quiet rhythm, or at least, it was trying to. The news reports were vague, attributing the rescue of Captain Leo Vance to timely military intervention and a fortunate discovery by a private pilot. Brody, of course, was notably absent from any mention, and local whispers had already begun to paint him as the bumbling fool he was. Dr. Evans had issued a meek, carefully worded statement about the challenges of wilderness medicine. Eris had received a flurry of calls, from national news outlets, from curious local reporters, even from a well-meaning but ultimately misguided lawyer offering to sue Brody for defamation. She ignored them all. She wasn't looking for fame, or even public vindication. The quiet knowledge of what she had done, and the silent respect she had seen in the eyes of Master Sergeant Reyes, was enough. She was in her hangar, wiping down the pontoons of her beaver, the comforting scent of metal polish and lake water filling the air. Her back ached, her hands were still rough from the cold, but a profound, weary satisfaction had settled deep within her. She was listening to the distant rumble of a prop plane, likely a tourist flight heading towards Glacier National Park. Then, a different sound. Not one plane, not a prop plane. A deep, guttural roar that vibrated through the very foundation of her hangar. The sound grew, swelling into a thunderous crescendo that shook the air, rattling the tools on her workbench. Eris straightened up, her heart giving a sudden, unexpected lurch. She walked to the large hangar doors, pulling them open. The sky above Lake Kintla was no longer empty. 4 F-16 Fighting Falcons, sleek, powerful, and utterly magnificent, cleaved the air in a perfect diamond formation. Their engines screamed, a defiant roar of power and precision. They flew low, barely above the tree line, their silver bodies glinting in the afternoon sun, directly towards her hangar. Eris stood transfixed, a single tear tracing a clean path through the grease on her cheek. This wasn't a routine flyover. This was deliberate. As the formation passed directly overhead, the lead jet, its roar deafening, peeled away from the others. It climbed sharply, vertically, into the endless blue of the Montana sky, a single, solitary arrow shooting towards the heavens. The missing man formation, a traditional salute to a fallen comrade. But this wasn't a salute for the fallen. This was a salute to the woman who had brought him back. The remaining 3 jets circled once more, their powerful engines echoing in the vast wilderness, then vanished over the eastern peaks. The silence that descended was profound, broken only by the gentle lapping of the lake against her pontoons. Eris, wiping her face with the back of her hand, felt a wave of raw emotion wash over her. It was the most powerful, humbling moment of her life. Then, she heard the crunch of gravel. A line of black SUVs and sedans, official-looking, drove slowly towards her hangar. She watched, her heart still thrumming from the flyover, as the vehicles pulled up, doors opened. Out stepped a dozen men and women, all in crisp, blue U.S. Air Force flight suits. They were pilots, young and old, their faces etched with a blend of professionalism and something more personal. At the head of the group was a stocky, distinguished-looking man with the insignia of a colonel. Beside him, leaning on a cane but standing tall, was Captain Leo Comet Vance himself, his arm in a sling, a slight limp in his stride, but undeniably, gloriously, alive. Eris stood there, in her oil-stained work clothes, her hair wind-blown, a wrench still clutched in her hand. She felt utterly exposed, yet fiercely proud. The colonel stepped forward, his eyes locking with hers. His face was grave, but a profound gratitude shone within them. "Dr. Thorne," he began, his voice clear and resonant, I'm Colonel David Albright, commander of the 35th Fighter Squadron. He paused, then gestured to Captain Vance. Captain Vance here told us everything. Every harrowing detail. What you did, it was nothing short of miraculous. You saved one of our own. You saved a son, a brother, a friend. He took a step back, facing his squadron. His voice boomed across the lake, echoing off the mountains. Squadron! The pilot snapped to attention, a unified line of blue against the backdrop of the hangar. 10 hut! And then, in perfect, synchronized motion, every single pilot raised their hand, snapped their wrist, and delivered a sharp, formal salute. Not to the colonel, not to Captain Vance, but to Eris Thorne, the civilian, the forgotten surgeon, the woman who had defied all odds and saved one of their own. Eris stood motionless, a silent figure receiving the highest honor her country's elite pilots could bestow. The years of burnout, the dismissals, Brody's contempt, the freezing terror of the blizzard, the desperate struggle in the tent, it all dissolved into this single, powerful moment of profound respect. The tears came freely now, hot and unstoppable, as she returned the salute, a simple, heartfelt gesture that spoke volumes. The ghost of the ER had finally found its peace, not in a hospital, but in the heart of the wild and in the unspoken gratitude of heroes.